because you had intergenerational learning. You had new dancers, it was very experienced ones, so new and old were learning together, unlike very much the classrooms where we keep everybody in one grade level. I mean, now there are many efforts to kind of do across grade. But then you also have a performance at the end. So you're not learning just, to feel good about dancing because Carnival comes along, and then when the different bands kind of display, the different samba schools display what they're doing. So he felt that was equally important. So hand in hand with making something which is a display, an explanation, representation of your knowledge, you also do this together with others, people who are more experienced and less experienced, and the goal of performance. And then, being part of a technology community, SEMA together, which Sherry Turkle, who was then his wife, also understood that there were cultural implications. You don't do these things in absence, in a vacuum. Culture tells us what is kind of more valued in terms of knowledge and approaches. And I think, computer science technology is a great example which values certain approaches, certain things more so than others. And I think these three premises, there's much more extensive discussion in Mindfully also illustrate, yes, the thinking piece, the objects to think with. Seymour coins the term, the turtle is an object to think with, are important. But I think in the end, he was really also kind of thinking about the objects to share with, that you really kind of are in a social context. And if you look at any educational theory, whether it's Lab and Wenger's legitimate peripheral participation, whether it's critical pedagogy, the idea that we're learning as part of a community is really much more common practice today than it was 20, 30 years ago, where we're very much enamored of kind of just thinking, focusing on what's going on and how your mind is designed, the kind of cognitive revolution. So I think that is kind of important to keep in mind. And we can actually use those as lenses to understand how we should look at learning and teaching programming. Because I think what you saw in the Minds in Play video illustrates three different what I call social turns in how we should kind of move from code to applications, from tools to communities, and from scratch to remix, no pun intended. So you saw on the screen, most people when they think about programs, they think about this, text machine code. Nowadays, of course, we have a lot of what's called visual programming language, and Scratch is a great example. One of the reasons why this is very popular, beginners, especially young kids, make a lot of typos, and you spend a lot of time debugging your program, trying to figure out. This avoids all of this, and these blocks have also a feedback built in. When they belong together, they kind of click. So you can actually make some aspects of programming much easier. So a lot of effort in computer science education and design has been focused on designing programming languages. Computer scientists are in love with designing new languages. And I think that's important. There are languages like Scratch, Alice, Kodu, Agent Sheets. My God, the logo alone has over 200 versions. And I think that's important, but that's not really everything. Because what we also need to be concerned about is what kids are making. So when you look back in the Minds of Play, it was creating applications. And nowadays, we design apps. This even has a short form. It's very popular from high school to college level that you learn programming within a context. And there's a lot of educational research which talks about authentic learning, that it needs to connect to personal interest, that it needs to have a relevance, and what better relevance, authenticity is than designing applications. So the idea was, when we kind of think about learning and teaching programming, kind of using the personal lens from constructionist theories. Yes, code, languages are important, but from a pedagogical perspective, we really should think about what kind of contexts, what kind of applications are designed. Are those instructional math games, educational software? Are those robots? Are there all kinds of things which can be designed? So the learning of code is contextualized. So then it becomes personally relevant and meaningful and shareable. Likewise, and I just mentioned actually Scratch, Alice, Kodu, Agent Sheets, tons of tools which people have developed to kind of learn programming. And it's true, learning programming actually isn't easy, no matter what people say. There's this kind of famous exponential curve, you learn a few things and then it gets really hard. And no tool has ever managed to soften out that exponential growth. But I think the focus is a little bit misguided. I think it's a very technocentric focus just on the technology. And what we learned with Scratch, which we started developing 10 years ago, that the community is equally important. Actually, Scratch, the programming language, has no innovative features. Everything you see there had already been developed or designed by somebody else. But when Scratch came with a social community, it was actually called first Scratcher, like Flickr, the photo sharing site. The idea when you design a program with a click of a button, you can upload it and share it now with millions of others. And that turns the act of programming into something else, into the shareable social artifact. And I think so we need to pay again. And if you think about classrooms have always been social communities, and teachers have been very good often in kind of orchestrating small group work, sharing experiences. But now we have a platform which actually allows us to share globally. I mean, Scratch has, I think, now 7 million members, 12 million. I mean, every minute a new project is uploaded. It's been translated into over 25 languages. So the community aspect, and which teachers, I think, have always known that you don't look just as the individual learner, but as a classroom, as a community. And likewise, when we think about teaching and learning programming, we need to think about the community as well. And then lastly, the cultural aspect. This is one of the main screens. This is actually an old version of Scratch, sorry, 1.0. There's this idea when you design programs, you have to do everything from scratch. You just write every single line of code. But the reality is, in a professional context, nobody does it. When they have to write a program, they go online to GitHub or anywhere else and check out who has already written something like this, and then cut and paste the code and modify or remix it. And remixing, for those of you who work in media culture, whether it's music, graphic, online, is a very popular practice among youth. It's unfortunately condoned in school because it smacks of kind of copying, not doing your own work. But Andres Monroy Hernandez, who was actually designer of the Scratch community, did some really interesting research that not every remix is a remix. Obviously, if you just cut and paste the code without changing it, nobody would expect you to learn anything. And kids are actually very finely attuned if you just kind of do this without any intellectual contribution. But there are many ways on how these remixes can be created. This is just some examples from the game of Pong. I don't know how many different versions of remixes exist of these games. And you can build these trees and you can see which particular kind of programs are very generative and creating lots of remixes on different variants. So I think from a schooling perspective, we have to kind of give up on this idea that you have to write everything because it's not the cultural practice of programming. We should go along with how in music, art, and other places with code, how remixing has become a practice on how to design and change programs. And that actually, by the way, is also one of the best ways to introduce beginners into a program rather than to present them with a blank screen, is to give them already a Pong game and then say, let's change the color. Very basic remix. Maybe let's make do the ball different things. add music, add other pieces, and then you can actually begin, you're working already with a fully functional artifact. And I think these three premises, the personal, social, as well as the cultural, are really what we need to think that computational thinking is great, but computational participation, kind of incorporating the social aspect, is really the way to go. To think about the context, what you're coding for, not for the sake of coding, but to make something that others can use. To do that as part of a community, to leverage that this community is there, because everything else is shared on the internet as well. Why shouldn't code as well? And also to think about the cultural practices. Remixing is just one example on how this can be accomplished. So computation, yes, but not just thinking really from a perspective of participating, so that what you code actually is being used. And once we can kind of settle on this idea that participation is the way to go, we also need to think about how we can broaden participation, because as I showed to you before in my introduction slides, we know that computer science and coding happens to be one of the least diverse communities, not just professionally, but also in school. There are many studies which show that girls don't engage, very few minorities, and we also know that we need to start early. We can't start at the college level, it's too late. It has to kind of happen in school in order to do it. And we have to think about deepening, because broaden is just kind of the shallow version on how we give people rich experiences. So I think about deepening from three different perspectives: in access, activities, and communities. So the first one about access is that programming can't just be in school. You don't just learn how to read in school. We all know that your parents reading your books at nighttime, I mean, the whole reading campaigns that you read when you're in the kitchen and you look at the cereal box. That literacy isn't just in the book, it's all everywhere. And so we can't just put the whole onus on schools, on teachers, the few hours per week you can have. We need to think about the communities, the clubhouses, online or offline, and there are actually many interventions, communities out there specifically to girls, African Americans. But I think they point the way. Many libraries actually now are opening centers, because libraries are beautiful. They have already the whole infrastructure in all neighborhoods, rich and poor, to give access every day to everyone. We also need to think about deepening communities. So Scratch is a great place which has, I need actually to update these slides, but when you look here, you can see we started out in 2007 when we went, released Scratch, the community, and you can see code.org came, and then exponential growth. What you also see here is projects. You see the projects, users, and comments. So what you have here is not just a site where there's code, there's also commenting and sharing going on, the thing you like to do on Facebook, MySpace, or other places, a kind of social activity. But the question we actually started asking, what are people doing beyond the kind of success stories? So with some colleagues of mine, I actually got access to the back-end data, because I was part of the team who wrote the two big grants from Scratch. And we picked 5,000 random users 2 years ago between January and March. We didn't know them. We just looked, whoever logged in December 2012, we picked 5,000 people. And then we looked at what they did over 3 months. So what you see right away is that there is a 55-45 split. About half of the kids actually never do anything. They go once on and then they're gone. They never come back. You might say this is disastrous. I can actually tell you from anybody who studies massive online communities, you know, those places with millions of people, this is very high participation already. In most of those communities, 5% of the users do 95% of all the activities. The rest are just kind of on the periphery. So we do have already nearly 50% of the kids, 45% who create a project. And creating a project leads you to, you know, network with other people, to download projects, to comment, and then also become highly engaged. And then we looked on what happens over 3 months. So what do the same kids do who we know who already posted a project? We don't know anything about the people who didn't post anything, you know. We have no way of tracking this online. What are they doing? And what you see here is a really interesting shift. That, I mean, in order, you know, you can kind of divide them in different clusters. And these are the people, obviously, who kind of participate very highly. And what you see here is only the people who really participate fully stay fully engaged over 3 months. We only have a window of 3 months. The other people, a lot of them just kind of disappear, and this is kind of latent class analysis, so you kind of calculate the likelihood of somebody being in a certain cluster. And, you know, so we have 5.96% who consistently stay over 3 months and very engaged, and the rest kind of go away. So that's not so surprising, because we know in a lot of those massive communities, the large number hides that in fact the small number of people are the ones who kind of generate all the activities. We looked also at the programs they wrote. Does it make a difference in terms of complexity? And what you find, the biggest class, 60%, are the ones who kind of use loops. Loops are kind of the entrance concept in programming. Booleans, absolutely not anything. A little bit of variable broadcast. And the highest class, which uses all of those concepts, these are very rough measures because we don't look at the programs per se, use everything. So what you see here, there is also a distribution on what's being used. Remember, Scratch is mostly a community of voluntary participants. It's not teachers, you know, it doesn't have a teaching agenda behind it. People come and post. And this is just for January. It actually doesn't change very much. We did actually recently some ongoing analysis looking at gender differences. And it turns out that the girls don't engage with the more sophisticated concepts. But otherwise, they're as present in the community. So what this tells us, when you look at all those, remember I said we need just not schools, but we actually do need teachers in schools. Because what we do by choice, joining these communities actually turns out to be not that easy. Kids are very hesitant to showcase their half-baked programs, especially when they look at the front page and they see the programs which are already liked 1,000 times, and it is so hard to get onto the front page. The whole discussion forums in Scratch dedicated with the tricks on how you can get all your friends to like your project so you can kind of get your liking up and then your project can kind of go up. So we need to kind of figure out on how to get people into those communities. It's not easy, believe me. I have very many projects where kids just flat out refuse to go online. They want to do the program, they don't want to necessarily do the sharing. But we also need to broaden, deepen the participation. And then we need to eventually move over into this kind of high levels of networking, of projects, posting, of downloading, and commenting, because that's where the real participation happens. It's not just kind of sitting on the sidelines. You want to make a project, because otherwise making a project is a gateway into this community. So when we look at schools, where we have designed interactions, if you do a project, Of course, you know, everybody in your class is going to participate in Scratch because that's just what you do. And you know, the girls who are there are going to participate too, but in terms of equity, we still have a long way to go because we do know that many girls don't opt or participate in computing classes. They don't take the AP course. I mean, 2 years ago, there were several federal states where not one student, not one girl had taken the AP exam. I mean, which is absolutely shocking. Even statistics, which was just introduced after CS, has higher numbers of participation. So the reason why I'm presenting this is all the voluntary by choice stuff in community organizations and putting things online is great, but it's not enough. Because we know from studying these communities that we only get that high, that not everybody immediately levels up to the more deeper forms, and I would argue also the richer forms of participation. And then we also need to think about deepening activities. So games and robots is not all that there is to computing. And I say that, you know, having done the first making your own game project, people were actually very surprised that girls at the time were interested in making games. They obviously made very different games. So I think today we have a much wider array where computation is happening. And I'm not arguing that games, which are very high, I mean, multi-million-dollar, billion-dollar business. Some people even say it makes more money than Hollywood, than the movie industry right now. Likewise, robotics is also in manufacturing and in many other areas a high business. But I think we also need to think about different activities. And so, as Jeanette mentioned, for the last 8 years I have worked with Leah Beakley on using electronic textiles as another way to kind of introduce computing. And in particular to show that it's not just a cute thing to do you can wear, but that we can actually make functionally as complex project. We can introduce the same computational concept and practice we can introduce with robotics. And we're actually just about to start on a grant with Jane Margolis and Joanna Gude, who designs the Exploring Computer Science curriculum, which is freely available and used by thousands of students in underserved communities across the United States, and to design an extension to that curriculum, an alternative robotics using electronic textiles. And who knows what electronic textiles are? Oh, well, so you know the LilyPad, Arduino, Leah, and you know, you stitch circuits, so you're actually bringing engineering into computing tools. You have crafting, the stitching and sewing, which by the way, very few people know sewing today, you know, but it's so deeply ingrained that sewing is for girls and the coding is for boys. So I think it actually also offers rich opportunities to have discussions in class about those lingering kind of stereotypes and why they are. And it's interesting because if you think about the origins of computing, I mean, arguably later, Ada Lovelace was the first programmer. She was a woman to write a program for the analytical engine. And she made this beautiful comparison, you know, writing a program for the analytical engine is like, you know, weaving the jacket leaves for the textiles of her time. Fabrics and not numbers was what started computing. So we also work on this in kind of on the college level. This is just an example of StitchFest and kind of designing alternatives to existing communities. And what you can see here in StitchFest, which we did at Penn Apps, which is the world's largest hackathon. Every semester, 1,400 college students and high school students descend for 36 hours of professing their love of coding. And what you see here is they're actually designing, this is one of the designs from last year, of designing wearable controllers. And I'm really excited about this. I did this project to showcase some of the sophisticated designs you can do, but now with Fitbit and the Apple Watch, wearables actually have become their own whole kind of product. It's not just kind of the cute things, there's a whole kind of, professional, authentic context behind it. And this was designed when Flappy Birds just came out and very popular. So you would use these controllers, use your arms essentially to navigate the birds across roads. What we actually managed to do with Stitch Fest is to double the number of women who came to this particular application. So I think it shows that by kind of deepening, changing activities, we can actually be successful in broad participation. So I want to conclude, the reason on why we did this, it occurred to me, that what we're talking about is participation in the digital public. And we have actually an analog in how the cities kind of became destitute and people realized that we needed participation of all, the voice of all, in order to make them livable places. And I would argue the digital public is as important place as the urban public, and we need a voice of everyone to make it a livable and functional place. And this can only happen, if you're a programmer or computer scientist, but if you have some ideas on how the things you're using every day, the buttons you press, on what kind of goes on behind those shiny cases. It's interesting how it's all made very transparent. So you can have a voice in how things are designed, what can be changed and what can't be changed, not just for you personally, but also politically. So Connected Code is all about computation. Connected Play was all about the participation side in a virtual world, on why kids are so actively on those online spaces, why they participate, what drives them in terms of identity. And I will finish the trilogy of tragedies, which one of my colleagues said. I was looking actually at connected gaming, because what brings better together computation and participation is games, where we also have this gigantic shift from just playing to making games. If you look at what's happening with Minecraft right now, which is an environment which is not just about playing game, but also about making games. And so I think coming full circle, we find ways to look at places where millions of kids congregate, but which we have essentially ceded to commercial companies with very few educational opportunities, in reconnecting to an opportunity which was missed 25 years ago. That's why I came to the United States, because in Germany there was nothing happening. And then when it was 4 or 5 years, everybody decided programming is out, multimedia CD-ROM is in. And so what a missed opportunity. And this is the other opportunity in serious gaming, which is very popular. We have only looked at playing games, but not making games for learning. And I said 25 years ago, as I say now, it's not just playing versus making, it's actually playing and making together. We need to bring computation and participation together. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Yasmin. You've covered all kinds of ground and really set the stage for our plans for our coding and communication course, and many of the things that actually we're focusing on in our Master of Education program for teachers. I'd love to open it up for questions, and maybe if when you ask a question you could introduce yourself at the same time. That would be great.
Okay, here, go first.
Peter Skillen. I actually work for YMCA now, but I was North York and Toronto District School educator for a number of years, and our paths, I guess, intertwined over the years because my work with Logo back in the early days, like Sheila. Mm-hmm. So I was wondering if you studied the nature of the commenting in the Scratch community at all.
Yes, because as part of this big data set, it was my terrific postdoc Debbie Fields, who's also a terrific e-textiler. She wears many hats. We're actually presenting in 3 days the first paper. We took 8,000 comments and hand coded them. We also did automated text analysis. But we were interested to what extent. The reason why this is important is a lot of the automated analysis is done on very constrained participation. Scratch, people say anything. You know, there's nobody which structures the discussion, so these tools don't often work very well. We have a paper on the automated analysis as well. But we looked at those comments, and the paper is actually titled, I have a tutorial for you, the language of online